Is it me that they speak upon? Niggas wanna creep up on, respect for me absent, won't hesitate to sleep me on my lawn.
Real ones know. Georgia Road Mo, the original Pretty Tony, the original Pretty Mo, OPM, back with this Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. pay-per-view recap that took place last weekend. I wanted to wait until I saw the pay-per-view numbers and got like a definitive amount because I was interested to see what kind of draw Mike Tyson would be at this age because I saw a lot of hype around his videos coming out of him training, and people were, oh man, he looks like the old Mike. I'm proud that it was reported that the pay per view did 1.2 million pay per view buys, and it was a $49 cost. That's amazing. That's an amazing number. That's a top 10, top 5 number all time. And strangely enough, it's Roy Jones Jr.'s first big pay per view of his entire career. And I think it was well deserved. Mike Tyson, he's been up there already. He was the number one guy with pay per view anyway. But Roy Jones Jr., being as great of a fighter as he was, being probably the best fighter, and he may be a top 5 all around pound for pound fighter of all time, never getting that big pay per view success. I'm proud and I'm happy that he's able to experience this. You know, uh, even though he had to get in the ring with Mike Tyson to do it, he said it was a bucket list thing. And hey, he's a fighter. So fighters are, not afraid to take punishment, pause, and get in the ring and do what they got to do. But let's get right into the fight. It was an exhibition, and you could see early on that the weight and the strength and size advantage that Mike had over Roy was an issue for Roy. He had to, Roy fought a smart fight. Mike was going to the body, he was ripping him to the body, and you could tell it was kind of affecting Roy. But Roy, he stayed in. He didn't give up. He didn't, and he did his thing. He showed us some flashes, with the fast punches, and he, for the most part, stayed in close to Mike, and he did his thing. They ruled it a draw, which I'm glad to see because it don't. If they had a gave the win to Mike, it still would have hung over Roy's head, even though it's an exhibition. He was outmatched from the gate, even though they're both older. I think Mike's 54, Roy 51, and Mike hadn't fought since '05. He still was overmatched with the guy that's just naturally bigger and stronger than him. Even though Roy fought at heavyweight, won a title at heavyweight, he was in his prime at that time. He could actually move, and they actually had a very small ring. So it wasn't much movement that Roy, he couldn't get away. And, Mike went to the body, so, once you go to the body, that's going to drain that energy. That's gonna still hold up no matter how old they get. So I'm proud, that nobody got hurt, visibly hurt, and nobody got knocked out. I didn't want to see Roy get knocked out. I didn't see Mike wasn't really swinging at the head as much. He didn't throw a whole lot of hooks to the head. I'm glad to see he did. He moved well. Mike looked good. He actually looked better than he had looked in his last few fights when he was fighting professionally. But I do know, when it comes to with the guys that was so much smaller, I knew Mike would look, you know, uh, a little bit better against him. I don't think he should, which is unfortunate and unfair. I don't want to see Mike in there with another small guy. Roy Jones made sense, the name made sense, but I don't want to see him in there with another small guy who's retired. And I really don't want to see him in there with a bigger guy because Mike might get hurt, especially if it was somebody. If it's somebody like Evander Holyfield, make the most sense. Evander's in shape, and they might get in a real fight. And Mike, he's one of my favorite athletes of all time. He's a little bit overrated. He's a little bit overrated, and he lost all his big fights. So I think if he got in there with the guy, let's say he got in with a Lennox Lewis, who's retired. I don't know how much shape he's in to fight, or he gets in with the Evander, who I've seen working out, who's in good shape. Mike might get knocked out. He might get hurt. He might not want to fight because that's the way he was when he fought a guy who was of that caliber, the upper echelon fighters. We saw a guy who wasn't that good. He didn't have any skill set at that point. He was looking for the big punch. He couldn't really take shots. He got knocked out in all his big fights. So he said he wanted to continue doing it, but if he can, I just don't want to see the guy get. I don't want to see Mike get knocked out. I don't want to see him get hurt. I don't want to see, anybody get hurt at that age. You know what I mean? But I'm proud that they sold 1 million pay-per-view buys. Congratulations to Mike. Congratulations to Roy. Roy may be my top 3 fighters all time. My favorite fighters all time. He may be in my top 3 best fighters all time. Let me speak on the Nate Robinson and Jake Paul fight. I see a lot of people had jokes about Nate Robinson. And I think I heard an interview he did speaking about him being one of the best athletes in the world and talking about how he watched Muhammad Ali and he did like man, you can't play around with boxing. Like boxing, you don't play boxing. You know what I mean? Like you don't. It's a science to it. And Nate, I watched him and he started out. I saw him throw a jab to the body, and I said, "Oh, okay." Then I started seeing him like kind of just rushing in with his chin out. Now the thing about Jake Paul that I see a lot of the casual fans or whatnot, I see they didn't understand that Jake Paul actually is a pretty good boxer. He's actually pretty skilled and he was pretty big on YouTube a couple of years ago. I don't know how much he's doing now, but I remember there was a big explosion where he was like just all over the place. He started doing songs and putting out like platinum singles and all that. He was so big on YouTube, his fan base. So what I always tell people is when you got a guy, let's say you got a young guy who's a talented amateur. He's an amateur fighter and he has to turn pro early because he doesn't have the financial backing behind him to keep him to be able to, go fight amateur and keep fighting the amateur fights, try to go to the Olympics. And he has to start earning money for the fights. Or you get a guy who turned pro and the fights aren't coming in, he has to get a job, but he's still fighting and trying to train and fight and live a regular life and be a fighter. He's already down 10 when they put him in a ring with a young prospect who signed, and he's a prospect, so they're putting money into him. This guy doesn't work. All he does is train and work out. He has a chef. You're down by 10 already going in there with that guy. I liken that to like a Jake Paul because Jake Paul is rich. I wouldn't say I don't know if he's wealthy, but I know he's rich and I know he trains all the time. So when you got a guy, he could probably beat a lot of guys who are pro who may have 15 fights, but they still have to work a regular 9 to 5 and they have to train when they get off work. They have to eat what they can and try to keep their weight. He could probably beat those guys because he's financially in a place where he could train, have a chef, eat properly, just live, eat, sleep boxing. And that's what he pretty much did with Nate. I know he was training, he had a fight last year. He was training up in Big Bear with Shane Mosley, kind of living a fighter's life. So it's a difference. It's a difference. And he's a pretty talented, him and his brother, they have skills. I don't think his brother has that heart for the boxing as much or the motor, but he has a decent skill set. They both have decent jabs. And Jake, he has a decent jab, and I see that he has some ring IQ a little bit because I saw him start timing Nate because Nate was charging in face first, and Jake was timing him with that overhand right. And I saw Nate didn't even see it coming. He didn't even see the punch coming, and he was looking out of it after the first one. And I thought the ref, after he knocked Nate down the first time Nate took a while to get up. It was a long count. The second one, it was another long count. I thought he should have stopped it because Nate wasn't reacting like a person who wanted to go back. He kind of was like, he's like looking like he was upset, maybe embarrassed a little bit, kind of hurt. He was hurt. And he came back and charged back in face first again. And Jake Paul timed him again with the overhand right. It was like a Danny Garcia special. And he ended up planking. And I ain't like that at all. I didn't like that. I know it was a professional fight and people paid money or whatnot. But Nate Robinson was not reacting the way a fighter should react when they get knocked down, when they're getting back up. He wasn't reacting the proper way. He should have been counted out, but I know, you're dealing with guys who are kind of rich and it's a big pay-per-view, so they had to let people get their money's worth. So they saw a clean knockout, like a straight knockout, and I hate that for Nate, because I like Nate, and now he has that on his record, or it's in the internet world, and that's gonna be a meme. There's a meme's going crazy, probably the top meme in the world right now, and people never forget it, especially if he tries to come back. But if he comes back, he has to train. He has to live a fighter's life. He should be, in a financial position to where he can. It's hard to teach that boxing to a guy, once you go out there and get punched in the face, and he was fighting, and Jake's a taller person. I know it was probably tough for him, so it's difficult to teach a guy that. But if he decides to get back into it, he needs to get like a real crash course in boxing and do about 5 amateur fights, because I think I want to see Jake Paul fight a professional, like someone with at least 10 fights. I want to see him fight someone of that caliber, because I think he may be a little bit further ahead than a lot of professional guys, strictly because of the money that he has to take care of his body and concentrate strictly on boxing and training. I think he's ahead of a lot of guys. So, I'm interested to see what he does next and who he fights next. I want him to fight a real fighter, not another novice, a real fighter. And with that being said, once again, congratulations to Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. Excellent, man. Beautiful to see that. Two of the greatest, two of the legends, two people that define an era in boxing, and they were able to get a lot of success out of this. Go home healthy, counting a little paper. So that being said, Georgia Road Mo, original Pretty Tony, the original Pretty Mo, real ones know. Gone.
It's never enough. Who want it with us? We tough as elephant tusk. Came from the mud. You want it, gotta take it in blood. All about a dollar. Never claim to be thug. All we ask is trust.